I'm a Palestinian, a very proud Palestinian. And I'm Palestinian Arab. My mother language is Arabic. It's such an easy language to learn. Why do you react like that? Go to the streets down, you will see even young children speak Arabic. So this is my mother language is Arabic. And I'm a Christian. And I'm also a citizen of the State of Israel. And all these four facets of my identity have the same respect in my conscience and my mind, but they're not at peace with each other. I was born in Upper Galilee in a village called Bar'am. The first image I had about Jews was given by my father. He said to us in 1947, children, within few days, we might have something very strange. Jewish soldiers. Strange because never Jews were soldiers in this country. They were like us. And he said, these soldiers have machine guns, but they do not kill. Because they survived the persecution of a certain devil called Hitler. And no one more than us Palestinians in Galilee has the responsibility to show them that somewhere they are welcomed. So be not afraid. And in fact they came. My father prepared a banquet, a real banquet, as for Easter, as for the resurrection. He saw in these Jews coming as resurrected people, because he said to us very often, these are our blood brothers. We gave them our beds, we prepared them food. They used our beds, we slept on the roofs of our houses for 10 days. After which, the officer of the army, whose name was Newman, ordered all heads of families to lock their houses, collect the keys, deliver them to the army, and go away for 2 weeks with a written promise, within 2 weeks you will come back. And we left. We lived for 2 weeks under olive trees, fig trees, in the grottos, in caves, around the village, waiting for the 2 weeks to elapse. But unfortunately, these 2 weeks are not yet finished, 54 years later. But what happened after the 2 weeks is that all the heads of families gathered and went to see the army. They have a written promise, you can return within 2 weeks. They went, whether you like it or not. They went, they never came back. I am responsible for every single word I say. They never came back. They were loaded onto military trucks and driven from the northern Galilee far to Nablus, near Shechem. And under the threat of fire, they had to go away, to cross the borders. And they walked from Nablus, across the Jordan, to Amman in Jordan, to Damascus in Syria, to Beirut in Lebanon. And the big majority was stuck there and became the refugees in the Arab countries. Very few were able to infiltrate back through the northern borders of the new state of Israel. Among them was my father. And that's how we knew what happened to them. Since then, my father continued instructing us never to forget to return home. And he always wanted one thing, to go back, rebuild his ancestral home, to which he relates back to the 16th century, and to live there at least for one day and die. He never ever spoke about settling accounts, about taking revenge. The only thing he wanted is to rebuild his destroyed house. I had the privilege and the honor to welcome here Shimon Peres when he was the foreign minister the first time. And while sipping coffee in my home, I reminded him of the problem of Bar'am and Ikrit, the two villages. And Shimon said to me, Father Shakur, you have built palaces here. It's so beautiful, it's nice. And you left Bar'am 53 years ago. Goodness, you were a young boy. You still remember? When will you start forgetting Bar'am? I was too audacious to tell him, Mr. Perez, you left Palestine 2,000 years ago. And now you come back to make our life hell. When will you start forgetting Palestine? He was very honest. He said, I am sorry to have answered you like I did. I deserve such a reaction. We do not need your help to continue the hostilities. We need your help to stop the hostilities. And stopping the hostilities mean for me, do not accept to become one more enemy, whether you are Jew or Christian. But if you can be one more common friend, oh God, we need you so badly. Otherwise, I'm afraid, with the warlords on both sides, we will go to a big catastrophe. It's time to act. Not to be impressed, but to act. To get your hands dirty. Not with the blood of others. Get your hands dirty even if you will be accused of being brainwashed or anti-Semite or anti-Palestinian. Get your hands dirty to build a real peace that is based on justice for both sides. You have always to choose in front of every act. You're tempted by the easy solution. It's so much easier to go make war. It's much more difficult to build peace.
Before the Oslo Accords, there was a great deal of, in 1993, there was a great deal of Sturm und Drang, if you will, about the issue of making peace. And there were people on the far right, people on the far left, people in the middle, and there was really very little agreement about what to do. So Rabin and Peres and his boys came in and they said, okay, we're going to try this. And during those years, from 93 till the year 2000, those 7 years, Israeli society was primed, I'm going to use that word, in all ways, in all facets, to accept that the idea that, yes, we needed to make some very painful compromises in order to achieve what we thought would be some kind of peace. And even people on the far right, if you read people on the far right, even they said, well, okay, we have given up as many articles written, we have given up the idea of what was known as a greater Israel, which was the idea of expanding more settlements. We've given that up. We are now convinced that we're going to have this process and we will have peace. Sad to say, two things went on. On the Palestinian side, precisely the opposite went on. There was no effort within Palestinian society whatsoever to get their society prepared to make those compromises. The Hefech, on the contrary, you see incitement in the press increasing, anti-Semitism in the press, classical anti-Semitism in the Arab press increasing, efforts to educate their children to hate Jews and to hate Israel increasing. All those things which we had hoped and which the Palestinian Authority had pledged to put a halt to. And they pledged, of course, to put a halt to violence in 93. All those things we've seen thrown in our face. As a result, you see Israelis now who have hardened their positions, which is totally understandable, obviously, since the beginning of this outbreak of violence. And you now see, I would say, if you again look at the polls, there's polls published every Friday, and the polls show that most Israelis don't feel that we have a peace partner. So now you have a division between those people. There are people who say, well, yeah, go in and militarily do whatever. That's a very small minority, I would say. And the rest of the people who say, we don't have a choice. We're going to have to continue to do what we're doing here. We hope that eventually in another generation, after this generation of dreadful Palestinian leadership, which has caused unbelievable pain to the Palestinian people, after they have gone their way by natural or other devices, that hopefully a generation will arise of Palestinian leadership which will accept finally the notion that we are here to stay, we're not going anywhere, and they will have to accept our existence in peace and not continually start these skirmishes which only cause pain both to them and to the Israeli people, and have in fact caused far greater animosity than it hasn't been successful. Israelis are very careful, again, despite all these stereotypes and all the things that you will hear, and no doubt people will show you about how terrible, quote unquote, the occupation is. I still maintain, and you can argue till the cows come home, Israel has the most moral army in the world. The considerations that we give to our civilians who are not involved in conflict is the most. You will not find any army in the world that does the kind of things that the Israeli army does. Every article and every TV picture where it talks about this conflict, it will say at the end, there'll be a paragraph at the end saying 900 and something Palestinians have lost their lives in this conflict, 280 Jewish Israelis have lost their lives in this conflict. And the natural assumption is to think, oh my gosh, only 280, quote unquote, only, and 900 and some Palestinians, that's terrible. What that doesn't take into consideration are two factors. One is that the Palestinian statistics include those who are suicide bombers. You're including Palestinians in that figure who, there's hardly any Palestinians, a few of course, who have been killed unfortunately as a result of accidental shooting or because they're standing next to somebody that's throwing something. Of course there have been those. I'm not suggesting that they're all guilty. But in those figures are included many, many Palestinian suicide, all of the suicide bombers. And the other thing that is not taken into consideration in those statistics is that the Israeli casualties are civilian casualties who are casualties traveling on this road, or standing outside a disco in Tel Aviv, or standing out or sitting eating pizza at Sabaros in Jerusalem. You're not talking about people engaged in the act of violence. Most of the Palestinian casualties are young men who are actively engaged in the act of violence. The white barricades, again, are concrete barricades that have been erected here to protect the citizens of Gilo from the attacks from across the way there. You'll see a little bit further up that this is definitely a permanent facility. We have artists here on the left who have been contracted to beautify, so to speak, if you can call it that, the concrete walls. But there were a tremendous number of incidents here which caused quite a bit of damage. Amazingly enough, not so many injuries, thank God. But if you look here on the left, you'll see the sandbags and the ambulance at the ready. This is Gilo. So here is the area of Gilo where we are right here. We're actually really right on the corner there. You can see that Gilo faces Beit Jala and Bethlehem. So what you're looking at down here is Beit Jala on the hills right facing us. And to the left, further over to the left is Bethlehem. Now you can see again, I think, what surprises most people here is the proximity. And this is where the shooting, or I don't know what the correct technical term is, actually not shooting so much, I think, and it's not shelling, but the action, you could say, directed against the citizens of Gilo has been coming from. All these areas here. And if you look very carefully, again, the light today is not so clear, but you can see some houses that have been blackened by the retaliatory fire from the Israeli positions that are here. Again, the perspective that I have, and I think if you look at polls that the majority of Israelis have today, unfortunately, which is a perspective that we didn't have during the Oslo Accords until this whole violence broke out, is that there is no tolerance for our existence in this area.
I know half of the people who were killed in Bethlehem area, they have never been in politics. A mother of 6 children, a mother of 3 children, a child came out from school, a child who was just praying in the Nativity Church and he will visit his family, was killed in front of Church of Nativity. It has never been done through all the colonial power and occupation that we used to have. I think they are all human beings. What does mean suicide bomber or whatever? I believe even our neighbor, the Israelis, don't understand that. Those people who carry out violent attacks on Israeli, and they will be killed. We should study their psychology. Why did they behave that? And again, if you think this situation will continue, you will have more people who are ready to sacrifice themselves. Practices of the Israeli occupation, the 2,400 laws that deal with our daily lives, the unjust approaches of the Israeli occupation, it create unhealthy atmosphere. An abnormal situation will create unhealthy relationship among people. And this is how a person who finds nothing, meaning of life is nothing for him, and maybe he has religious also beliefs, will find it's better to sacrifice myself rather than to live just a life that has no meaning. I wouldn't condone such actions, but I tell you, anyone could be in that route. You know, when I have the tank in front of my home, and my kids couldn't sleep at home, we found a cave under a lucky were to sleep there, to be protected. And when they see their friend Johnny killed, my kids always ask, why? What is the purpose? Why is he killed? Erasmus, a great philosopher, said, horses are born, human beings are made. And every violent person is made as a result of the socio-economic political situation. And if you have a file of each one, you will see what kind of life he has been living, how many brothers or relatives have been lost, how much land, how much damage. I don't want to say they have justified, their actions are justified. At the same time, I believe we need to eradicate all reasons that cause violence. And when we talk about violence, we cannot have only a prefix for the Palestinians, terrorist or fundamentalist or violent. What we are witnessing now is a state-organized violence against the people. And of course, violence will make violence, will create violence, and will be a vicious circle that leads no way. I feel if we stop the occupation, we will stop the state violence, we'll stop the state-sponsored violence, and we will stop the reacting violence, which is the individual violence. I know lots of people who are even in the opposition, from Islamic groups or leftist wings. What they are looking for is just a way to live in dignity and in security. And I feel both people are tired of bloodshed. I cannot talk on behalf of Israel, but both people are tired of bloodshed. What we want is dignity, to restore our rights, to have a place called home.
I'm a city planner. I was very excited when the mayor asked me to take over the department that plans the Arab neighborhoods that were conquered and brought into Jerusalem in 1967 as a result of the war in 1967. And I was very pleased about having the opportunity to do that. Because that would be my contribution to this wonderful new world we were going to build in the city of Jerusalem. We would plan the Arab neighborhoods in a way that would permit them to grow and to develop, and all the people in the neighborhoods would have options, different options than they had ever had before. Options for growth, for urban involvement, political involvement. And I was wrong. You are on land that was expropriated from Arabs. Now, here, in my house, I live on land that was expropriated. I'm over here. That's where we all are now. On land that was expropriated from Arabs to build many new grand Jewish neighborhoods, like this one. It's really a very grand neighborhood by all Jerusalem standards. My neighborhood has everything a person could want. Really, a lovely place to live. I love it here. They're nice broad streets. We have about 23 vest pocket parks, about 5 very large neighborhood-sized parks. We have play fields. We have many schools of all kinds. At the same time, the Arabs' neighborhoods were planned so that they would be able to live on extremely constricted land areas. They were also, and this is not a planning issue, they were also not given equal services. And I want you, as you drive over to Isawiya, it would be possible to drive through French Hill a little bit and see what a fine and lovely neighborhood it is, and to drive through Isawiya and see that Isawiya has none of the lovely things that we have. Many of these neighborhoods don't have a sewage system, and the sewage runs freely on the streets. And remember, this is next door to me, so that the contrast between how I live and how my friend Mr. Darwish lives is apparent to both of us all the time. And it's a very painful thing to live with seeing how much better I live than Mr. Darwish and his people live. The maps that I have show that Isawiya owned all of this land, all the green and all of the orange on which we sit today. The little yellow blob, which is Isawiya, is where they are permitted to build and to live. They are not permitted to build or live, certainly not on the expropriated land where I live, but on all this land that they own. They are only allowed to live on this yellow blob. And we can go through the whole map, and the same thing is true with regard to all of the 19 villages that we conquered in 1967. I have to tell you that there is a huge number, not as huge as I would like it to be, but hard workers who are Zionists, who believe in a Jewish state and know that if we don't worry about our neighbors and worry about human rights and build the state on the basis of human rights, we will not have a Zionist state. So we must all work toward it, all of us. And they're wonderful organizations. Here in Jerusalem is a hotbed of such organizations that work with Palestinians, that lobby our government to change its policies, and that's a very hopeful thing. But we haven't been very influential.
It was 8 in the morning and we were asleep when they arrived.
يعني لو היינו מכירים מה קרה כלום, כשיצאתי שמעתי רעש על הגג של הבית שלי.
I heard this noise and I looked out, and just everywhere there were police and soldiers on all the roofs surrounding us, and there were a whole bunch of bulldozers down here. And I came out and I said, "What's going on?" They said, "We've come to demolish homes." I didn't think for a minute they were coming to my home, because we hadn't received any warning that our home was targeted for demolition.
לא באו אליי לתת לי מכתבים בכלל.
I came and I saw that I asked someone who was here, I don't know, either a border police officer or a municipal officer, Khatam said, and I asked, is our home slated for demolition? And he says, I don't know, we just are ordered to start demolishing homes there. And as the tractor, as a bulldozer first started knocking into the walls of my house, I said, do you have papers? Do you have something that shows that you're supposed to demolish this house? And he says, they just told us to demolish in this area and get out of here. My father came and actually received, got hit here. So last week, we received order that the demolitions were about to take place. As has been happening more and more often, some of the families had advance notice. Other families only received word that their homes were going to be demolished the evening before or not at all. And although the law requires giving you a longer period of time to oppose the demolition, because we've been successful using legal methods to stop demolitions lately, what the municipality does is just runs ahead and carries out the demolition before anyone has a chance to take legal action. We came out here, and you can't see from here, but down there, just where we came in from the village, there were a number of, a vast number of police and border patrol people. We kind of zoomed by the first few, and when they said stop, we said, we are human rights workers, we have a right to be here, and we just went in. But as we started to try to come up the hill to where we saw the bulldozers working, we were stopped. We were told we were just being asked to leave, but when we got to my car, I said, now we're detaining you. So we lied down, we went limp, we lied down on the ground, and the next thing I remember was seeing one woman by the name of Nhat and Gabi being very roughly pushed into the police van. And at some point, or in waves really, various officers went into rages, and that's when I got beat as well, by batons, kicks, punches, whatever. He said that, first of all, what can we do? But, I just don't sleep at nights. This was my dream. This was my dream to have a home and be able to get married. And I just don't sleep at nights. This money didn't come easily. I worked 5 years and studied and worked 5 years to earn that money. I worked day and night and saved and scrimped and scraped and everything, and it goes like that. I'm still not thinking clearly. I just can't sleep. I can't sit here and look at the house. I just can't do it. I'm just not sleeping or thinking clearly at this point. Maybe God will help us. As a rabbi and as an Israeli, as a Jew, as a Zionist, I get no great pleasure in dealing day in and day out with some of the deepest, darkest corners of Israeli society, the things that all of us would rather pretend don't exist. But first of all, they do exist, and my faith, similar to the idea of co-creationism in Christianity, is this idea that we are supposed to be partners with God, what we call tikkun olam, being partners with God in the ongoing act of creation, of improving the world. When I know that there are Palestinians that are sleeping in their homes that wouldn't have a roof over their head were it not for what we do. Those are some of the things that allow me to keep on going. And the real answer is my little daughter. Because I want to be able to, when she gets a little older, to look her in the eyes when she asks me, Daddy, what were you doing when?
The Palestinian terrorism, which began last year, or increased last year, in a sense is hurting Palestinians more than it is Israelis. We may be paying a price in lives, but when you think of how close Palestinians came to the realization of their dreams and where this is going right now, I think the ones who are eventually losing are them. And the tragedy of this situation is that Yasser Arafat, who's supposed to be embodying the dreams of the Palestinians, is bringing them on the verge of their third and perhaps final Nakba, as they call it, or their third tragedy. And the whole concept of Oslo was based on the concept that we would gradually, slowly, after years of conflict, find a solution and solve our differences in a peaceful manner. Now, he may have had some grudges last year, but a resort to violence was not the answer, and this is what he did. And therefore, Israel has no alternative but to stand up and defend itself. The circumstances brought Sharon to power because Israelis are very concerned, and I'm looking for the right expression to show that it's not that we're against peace, but we're very concerned about our security and the sincerity of the Palestinians at this time. We do not think that Yasser Arafat can provide a solution, a peaceful solution to the conflict. There is this growing feeling among Israelis, experts, and in the government that as long as Yasser Arafat is the leader of the Palestinian people, there will be no peaceful solution to the situation, because in his concept, they're not looking for a solution, they're looking for justice. And when you look for justice, there are no compromises. And this is what we're concerned about. Because we cannot solve all the injustices that the Palestinians believe happened to them over the past 53 years. We cannot correct all that happened over the past 53 years. What we can do is take the situation as it is today and try to find a way of living together. Our problem is that we're no longer dealing with theories of what could happen. We've seen that. As a resident of Gilo, I don't have to theorize anymore what could happen if I have Palestinians 200 meters away from my house, independent Palestinian military. We saw that. We had mortar shells falling on our city. In Jerusalem, Gilo is a neighborhood in the capital of Israel. I don't think any country in the world would have been willing to tolerate what we've gone through over the past 14 months and still consider perhaps finding a peaceful solution, because we understand that the only way of resolving this is peacefully. All the actions that we've taken in these territories are a result of trying to protect our civilians, meaning, first off, the closure on the territories. It began because it's not that the Palestinian police or Hamas were coming in and we could tell that these are uniformed people coming in and trying to penetrate Israel. They're people dressed up as civilians. Some of them are civilians. Most of the people who are the suicide bombers themselves are not in any of the hierarchy of these terrorist organizations. The hierarchy chooses them, brainwashes or whatever they do to them, convince them to perpetrate the attack, and they come into Israel. Then inside the territories, we started finding out that between the Palestinian cities, there was connections going on between these terrorist organizations. To try to disrupt that, we have the roadblocks in these areas. We're fully aware of the animosity that it causes, the anger, the hatred, the disruption of their lives. At times we try to ease restrictions, but every time we ease these restrictions, within hours you have a terrorist taking advantage. They're looking for any advantage they can get. And we have to close those advantages. And if this means that the Palestinians' lives are going to be more uncomfortable, well, we'd rather that happen than people lose lives on our side. I'm not saying that the Palestinians don't have a right for their fight for their freedom, but there's how you do it is how you're judged. And this is not freedom fighters. These are cowards. These are terrorists. And people have to understand that Israel is a democracy that's fighting for its survival right now. It's a terrible, difficult struggle. Sometimes we have to curb the principles of democracy that we hold very dearly in order for the most important thing, which is the protection of the civilians and the citizens of this country. Terror is terror is terror, and can be no acceptance to that.
This is an impossible situation. This is an impossible situation. With all honesty, I tell you, I belong to the hardcore of Fatah, the main organization. Between the time when I joined and now, I came, like many of my colleagues, we came a long way, a very long way. We believe in coexistence with Israel. We endorsed the peace process wholeheartedly, not because the peace process or Oslo brought about justice, but because it brought about less injustice. And we thought it would be the turning point where we iron out our problems with the Israelis through negotiations, through dialogue. But we feel betrayed. In 1994, when the Palestinian Authority was established, we did have a message to our people, to younger people, especially the younger generation. It was a message of peace, a message of hope, a message of prosperity. We could tell them, and we did tell them, that now, from now on, you can dream like young men in other countries. You can plan for your future. Your dreams will not remain the prisoner of the Israeli whim, whether you can get a permit to go to school or not. You will be the master of your own destiny. And our younger generation believed us. But what we said proved to be fake. That's why we feel betrayed. We told them several settlements will freeze. We told them there will be no arrests, no closures, no collective punishment. But they saw it almost every day. We reached a point where we couldn't convey the same message to our younger people. Now we tell them we need to be patient. We should not lose hope. We should not lose faith in our friends, whether they are Israelis or non-Israelis. But with the presence of somebody like Sharon, we can't even say that. So what if a Palestinian who is desperate pulled the trigger? We will be accused of being violent. So we are denied international protection thanks to the veto of the American government. We were denied any kind of international monitors, again thanks to the American government. We are being accused of being terrorists and violent if we attempt to protect ourselves. And it seems that in both the Palestinians and the Israelis, the majority are the captives of the radical minority. And this is unfair. Among the Palestinians, the radicals are anti-Arafat. In Israel, the radicals are led by Sharon. And that is a huge difference. When we say we want peace, we mean it. We have an interest in peace. When we say we want to coexist, we mean it. We want to coexist. And we put our lives on the line for adopting such ideas. And as I told you, some of our colleagues paid with their lives because they initiated the first step towards coexistence, towards negotiations, towards peace. But it seems the whole process is being reversed. And the worst is yet to come if somebody like Mr. Sharon would remain a leader in Israel. We've been killed, brutalized, assassinated, our land confiscated. We protested. We jumped into in front of the bulldozers, in front of the tanks. It didn't work. It is unbearable. You know what it means? How would you feel if your wife couldn't cross the roadblock and give birth at the roadblock and loses her baby? How would you feel? How would you feel if you wake up in the morning, go to your work, and then you are stopped by a roadblock that turns your day into hell? How would you feel if your 10-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy was killed while going from school? How would you feel if you were the father of Johnny Thalji, a young man who was shot in front of the Church of Nativity? He had nothing to do with politics. He was not part of any resistance. He was coming out of the church. How would you feel if you were his father? The hardships put before the Palestinian population, it is part of the military plan. They know what they are doing. They think that we will kneel, they will break our will, they will not break our will. We don't ask the Americans to be anti-Israel. We want them to be somewhat fair in certain matters, to be objective. We can't afford losing hope. And we don't go by hope alone. It's faith. Peace is inevitable. It is inevitable. Whether Palestinians and Israelis like it or not, peace is inevitable. And it is in our hands to make it work, to make it happen. Some Israelis and some Palestinians would say we are doomed to live together. No, it could be we are blessed to be together. Why should we remain the captives of all fossil-like ideas? Why don't we look forward to the future?
I live in Efrat. I moved there, said before the Intifada, it was a nice, small, caring community in a beautiful, quiet hillside outside of Jerusalem, living in peace and harmony with the Palestinian villages in the area. There was a lot of cooperation. There still is a lot of cooperation. It is not in the news because it threatens the lives of those Palestinians. And they're all fully aware of that we live in this strange thing that you can say what Jews are doing, but you can't really say what the Palestinians are doing. Why there isn't a loud voice for peace, why there aren't people demonstrating in the streets for peace. I believe with all my heart and soul that probably 90%, probably 99% of people want peace, and they want to live and coexist in peace. They can't stand up and say it. Because we're living in a situation, there's 1% terrorist and 99% terrified. And that's very, very important to understand. To me, over the years that I've worked with this, and like I said, from my earlier years in civil rights and being very close with American Indians and seeing what was, what happened to them and how their history was written and rewritten. And then beginning to see, sometimes wondering, who's the Indians here in Israel? The media has played it up that the Palestinians are the Indians being uprooted by these cowboy Israelis. But the Jews were here before as the Indians, uprooted by all the Roman cowboys and Babylonian cowboys, and it's like, and they say, but before that, so part of the thing that we really have to start seeing is that there's like in that meditation, it says don't just focus in on one person, yourself or whatever, but recognize also just historically what time is about and what people are about and who's here and who's been here for so long. And if anyone, anywhere on this planet would have let Jews live that long in any one place, wouldn't that have been nice? That doesn't get mentioned, that we could have been here for 4,000 years and waved out the window and pointed at, but we've been moved and removed and moved and removed and moved and removed. And it's important to recognize that that doesn't mean that the Palestinians haven't been here for a few more generations. But let's, again, put it into perspective. I saw a map printed by the United Nations 1 year ago. Because times march on, maybe a year and a half ago now. Palestine, the Holy Land. Okay, I mean, I can understand. I mean, they want their piece of, let's open the map, at least see where Israel will be faded in the background. And you know, like in any map, the country you feature is standing out and the other things around it are faded. And there's no mention of Israel. It's not on this map printed by the United Nations. Palestine, the Holy Land, and it has Jerusalem and all the cities under their Arab names and various, but not a mention of Israel. So I began, as liberal and as whatever as I am, I began to see that there's a problem here, that we're talking about land for peace. But if we're negotiating with people who don't acknowledge we have any land, what are we, how do you work out this exchange? I kept saying it's land for ink. Forget about peace. Peace is very ethereal and hard to achieve even in the best of times between the best of friends, you know. But how about land for ink? How about spilling a little ink? How about printing something that gives us some recognized something on the map? You want to make it pre-48? You want to make it 67? You want... Put us on the map.
We should learn, we should know that violence will not lead, is not going to lead anywhere. It only begets more violence. Violence isn't going to help the Palestinians to achieve their purpose, and it isn't going to help the Israelis to achieve their purpose. And that therefore reason tells us that if we want to achieve our purpose, we should drop the use of violence and come back to negotiations. A utopian situation would be if the Secretary of State Powell will determine to come to Jerusalem and will call up the ministers of foreign affairs of Russia, Japan, and the Europeans, and they will all turn up in Jerusalem on a specific day, settle in some major hotel here, and then having done this, issuing an invitation both to Mr. Sharon and Mr. Arafat to immediately and unceasingly, continuously, to sit together, both themselves as well as all their aides who are relevant, until they work out a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They should be told that the negotiations begin, say, at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, but will only end once they have in fact signed an agreement. But that we have to define the terms of a solution, of a final settlement first. Now, as we do this, I said, refugees will be a problem that the Palestinians will have to come to terms with, because Israel isn't going to accept, in a two-state agreement, the return of over 4 million Palestinians into pre-67 Israel. This is not something Israel will accept. So it's a deal breaker. So if the Palestinians want a two-state solution, they have to take that into account and work around it. And they have to be open about it. And with regard to settlements, I said, and borders, that it will also be a deal breaker if the Israelis insist, as they work out evacuation and the pullout, if they insist on remaining in the West Bank and Gaza, in any form or shape or whatever, whether it's settlers or armies or whatever. So they have to think in terms of pulling out to the 67 borders. And in terms of Jerusalem, I said this is a city that neither side is going to give up. Neither side is going to give up on Jerusalem. So something needs to be worked out on Jerusalem, which will express the sharing of Jerusalem by the two sides. And I said, perhaps, if people need a formula to work with, I said, perhaps one could look, or the two sides could use the Clinton proposal as a basis for creating or thinking of a sharing design. A lot can be done and was done with nonviolence. And, I'm on record as being against the use of violence, against Israelis. I mean, not only on, I'm partly against it on moral grounds, but partly on political grounds. And, I'm on record as saying also that I want a non-military state, as you said, and I'm partly also in favor of that on political grounds. I think the best safety that a future Palestinian state can have is the absence of arms. You either have 10 nuclear weapons stuck in your drawers or whatever that you can threaten people with, or you have nothing, and it's just as powerful. Rationally looking into the future, I think both sides cannot but see that there is a joint interest in this future by the two sides, a joint interest. And given that there is this joint interest, it only stands to reason to say that therefore the two sides really are the real objective allies of one another in bringing about that future. In other words, that the real allies in this messy war between the Israelis and the Palestinians, the real allies are the Israelis and the Palestinians.
My son Kobe Mandel, was 13 years and about 10 and a half months when he was murdered by Arab terrorists. I'll tell you that story, a little bit about who he was, what happened to him. I want to tell you a little bit about his bar mitzvah, because it tells you why we moved here. His bar mitzvah took place in Tekoa, which is a settlement in the West Bank. You may call me a settler, I call me a human being. And it's a beautiful place. It's half religious and half not religious. It's a place of tremendous spiritual intensity and tremendous tolerance. At his bar mitzvah, on Friday night, there's what's called a Karbach service, which is that everybody gets up and dances and sings. It could last for 5 minutes, last for 10, 15 minutes. The particular night of his Friday night of his bar mitzvah was a particular period where there was a lull period in the services in the synagogue. There was some conflict within the synagogue, and there hadn't been a lot of dancing. The night of his bar mitzvah, we started to get up and dance, and suddenly the circle began to grow. And it began to grow to virtually every man in the place. And most of the women were dancing around in circles, the men in one big circle. And we were singing one song, one tune after the other. And you stand holding hands, and I looked across the circle at Kobe. And he stood there, and his face was toward heaven, and he had this beatific smile on his face. And his eyes were kind of up there, and he was just drinking in drinking in the melody and drinking in the dancing, because I think he knew that this was for him and his family, that what made people get up and dance was connected in some way to who he was, and that it was his bar mitzvah, and that we had come from America. And I thought to myself, this is why we came to Israel. This is why I schlepped my family. This is why I dragged my family all the way, because I wanted to give them a Jewishness, a religious experience that I would have wanted my parents to give me. 10 months later, he was still 13 years old. He was in 8th grade. His friend Yosef Ishran came to him in the morning before school. My wife and I looked at each other and said, well, maybe he'll get to school on time. We were happy that Yosef came. Instead of going to school, they walked around the back of the house, right, down about 500 yards away, right, to what is essentially the backyard, one of the most beautiful scenes you will ever imagine. It's like the Grand Canyon in Israel. Craggy cliffs, a 10-minute walk from the house, places where the kids of Tekoa had been playing virtually every day for the past 20 years, and nothing had ever happened. They went out there to look for a place to have a bonfire for a celebration called Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, in honor of the Kabbalistic Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And the tradition is that the kids gather wood and they go out to various places in nature and they have a bonfire. And he went out to find a place for his friends. As he went down there, he was spotted apparently by some terrorists, Palestinian terrorists. He went down around a corner, and he and his friend were attacked in an unbelievably brutal fashion. When they were found, there were rocks the size of bowling balls covering their bodies. During the day before the funeral was supposed to happen at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We got a call about 11 that said, we can't have it then. Do you have the dental records? The boys were so brutally beaten they couldn't be identified by sight. They had to have the records. The other boy's son, Yosef Ishran's son, who had become very close to the family, turned to me not so long ago, and he said, did Kobe have a nose? Right. Apparently, Yosef was so badly beaten that his nose had been torn off. This was done closer to them than I'm sitting to any of you. This was done while the Palestinians were looking into the eyes of two little boys who didn't shave yet. Never kissed a girl. So many things that they hadn't done. Yeah. It's my job now. It's to make sure that he and Yosef, that their lives are given meaning, that their deaths are given meaning, that he stands as a symbol of what hatred can do.
I was on the main road to visit a friend, and I heard just voices and shouting from the north side of the Arabic entrance. I asked somebody to explain for me what's going on. He said there is a demonstration and a lot of people collected there. I turned to the north side, and I saw maybe 500 people on the main road and between the live streets, just shouting and saying slogans against the occupation and the policemen. Up of the hill there was a few members of police in blue shooting gas against the demonstrators. At this moment, he was sitting beneath an olive tree, about 40 meters from the demonstrators. He was just looking around. I think he was something like a I cannot qualify it. Just looking, and suddenly three of those guys stand up and start running down to the demonstrators. At the point beside us, they jump to him. He stand up to run away, but they reach him and circled him. They beat him on his back, and he fall down. They continue to beat him, and suddenly they shoot him. It was something like hunting. I start to cry. A seal died, a seal died. Few men took him to Sachin Central Medical, and from there they transport him to Haria Hospital. All the time I was after the ambulance, and on that way there was another block, and they forced us to stop and not continue. The driver said that he has martyrs here, injured men, and the policeman answered, "You can die together with them, but we cannot permit you to continue." The driver asked them quietly to permit us because we are the family of a seal. And after maybe 10 minutes, he permitted us to continue. When we arrived to Nari, I asked if they have somebody named Asil. A doctor came out and he said it's very serious. Just keep quiet, and we will do our best. We went back to outside the room, and after about 20 minutes, he called me in and said just one word: Asil is died. So I entered to Asil. He was just sleeping. I kissed him and said goodbye. Since the death of Asil till now, there is one question always we ask: why? Why they killed them and the others? by this way. And there is no answer. Since the murder of a seal, I just working like a machine. I don't think about the future and the hopes. But since the murder of a seal, I think they killed the peace.
I think no one realized how much Seeds of Peace meant to Seal until he died. But after we found things that he wrote, I mean, personally, I never know how he did it. I mean, I find it very difficult to do. To combine this all together messed up situation. And somehow he managed to be very, very comfortable and very truthful with everything that he said about being an Arab and a Palestinian and writing very, very strong things about it. And on the other hand, managing to walk in a very delicate and very hard situation, to be some kind caught in the middle, to sometimes make choices between forgiving and forgetting, between listening and believing the other side and accepting the other side. And he managed to do all that, and Seeds of Peace meant a lot to him. It's not easy. Many times I think about my younger brother. I mean, how is he gonna... I mean, his brother was killed when he was 10 years old. His brother was killed before he was even old enough to understand the real conflict of this thing. And how is he going to live and raise his kids to feel safe, while when he was a kid, he wasn't safe himself? He felt threatened. But to tell you the truth, after he was murdered, I lost hope. Because if something like that happens, you have, you expect for at least apologies and investigation. Fair enough that we continue at least from the point that we stopped. But from the way I see things, we're heading back even. We're back to point zero. And, it takes a lot of your hope and a lot of your strength to try again. And like my dad said, we don't think anymore about any future, because the future that you always thought about, my dad for 50-something years and me for 21 years, is not as clear as we always thought it was. And it's difficult to be living with no future to think about, with no hope to carry with you, just living because you're living. You happen to be living.
As far as Intifada is concerned, there's no Intifada. We have a reality of a campaign of terror against Israelis, Israeli citizens, and Israeli soldiers. It's organized. It's very organized. The majority of incidents have been, as I said, against, and injuries have been against civilian targets. So the people who are targeted are clear. Settlers, bombs blowing up in the middle of cities. And when I say that it is organized, what do I mean? not only do Palestinian Authority, various different people within the Palestinian Authority give distinct directives concerning terrorist attacks. We have a situation where Palestinian police force, various different Palestinian security forces, the various intelligence forces, all participating, shooting at civilian targets, not at military targets, and this is well known. The Palestinian Authority are also granting a safe haven. Anybody that carries these things out, of course, as far as Israel is concerned, they should be arrested and tried. But they have a safe haven. They're walking around freely. They have no problems within the Palestinian Authority. All of the previous prisoners that were within the Palestinian Authority, the members of Hamas, of the Islamic Jihad, they have all been released. The IDF is responsible for the civil population. The IDF is responsible to prevent bombs from blowing up within Israel. And this, of course, has its impact on the Palestinian population within the field. Personally, I travel daily throughout the West Bank. I travel with body armor. I travel with a helmet. 6 months ago, I was a welcome guest in Nablus. I welcome guests in Ramallah, to Palestinian dignitaries. Some of these dignitaries today are pointing their weapons at us. And this is why I have to travel with this body armor. So this is how I feel personally. I feel constantly threatened. The way we deal with it in the field is the orders are clear. There is at least one route to each village which is open to enable the entrance of goods, foodstuff, medical care, medication, ambulances. Now, it's not an ideal solution. But the reality isn't an ideal reality. I mean, we didn't want this situation. We didn't want the terrorists. We didn't initiate any of the activities. The violence was initiated solely by the Palestinian Authority. You feel the tension in the air. You feel it. I mean, whether you're traveling within the West Bank, whether you're visiting a mall, when my wife is going shopping, or if I want to go out to a restaurant with friends. I came from England, as I said. One neighbour on the left was a Muslim, on the right was Christian. So it can work. People can live together, but people have to get used to the idea. They were getting used to it. We were getting used to it. And the Palestinians took a strategic decision to change the reality.
I like to visit my mother without passing roadblocks or without traveling lots of kilometers around to avoid a checkpoint. Unfortunately, I cannot do that. Maybe it's known for you that in Hebron there is a few hundred settlers living in the city center. Those belong to the extreme Israeli right groups in Israel. Many of them belong to Israeli political movements that are illegal according to the Israeli law itself, such as Kach and Hanh. But those people still move in town freely. They carry their guns. They attack the Palestinians under the eyes of the Israeli police and the Israeli security services. And and the different Israeli security branches without being stopped. If I walk down in the Shuhada Street, and if I am attacked by a settler, the most thing can an Israeli security officer do to solve the problem is asking me out, asking me to go out as a cause of provocation while walking in my city. While the side who is attacking me is attacking me, it's clear. Anyway, this is a fact that the settlers living in the city center, a few hundred settlers, 500, 400, don't care about numbers. They live among nearly 25,000 Palestinians. And in my view, the Palestinians are kept hostages on behalf of the few hundred settlers who live in the old city, or for them. In many cases, for the security of the settlers, the Israelis allow themselves to impose curfew and detain these 25,000 Palestinians in their homes for a few days or a few months or a few weeks under the, as I said, the excuse of security. In the last year, or since the Intifada began in September 2000, the occupied part of Hebron lived like 70% at least of their times under curfew. And many times, it's a big risk for a Palestinian to travel from here to Bethlehem. It's a big risk for a Palestinian to travel from here to Ramallah. It's a risk because maybe you will face roadblocks, and maybe you don't find a road, an alternative road, a dirt road, I don't know what road, that you can succeed to come back home proper time. That's something. In many cases, while trying to travel around a checkpoint or something, the Israelis will open fire at people, whether they are walking or whether they are using vans. Lots of the Palestinian vans has been shot at. Many Palestinians have been wounded while trying to use other roads, while trying to walk around a checkpoint. So what I'm saying here is that there is no military solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. You cannot fight Hamas and Islamic Jihad while you are not allowing people to get health care and they die at a roadblock. You cannot fight Hamas and Islamic Jihad while the Palestinian unemployment percentage is nearly 50%. You cannot fight Hamas and Islamic Jihad while Ariel Sharon is assassinating people under ceasefire and those people are not allowed to try to protect themselves. The world, for example, if a suicide bombing happens in Tel Aviv, we will see a huge international pressure on Arafat. But, for example, 2 days ago, Ariel Sharon has destroyed 75 houses at Rafah in Gaza. Which of the different countries of the world has sent a special envoy to talk with Ariel Sharon about this? Leaving 75 families homeless is something not small. I am enraged with the whole situation. I am angry. I'm angry, as I said. I see children killed, and nobody is moving thing in the world. If they are Palestinians, but if they are Israelis, then it's different. I think in other countries they call it discrimination. They call it racism. But in Israel, it's called security problem.
So a couple of years ago, before the start of the Intifada, a minister of non-governmental affairs, Hassan Asfar, who's working with the Palestinian National Authority, he passed a decree making normalization efforts between Israeli and Palestinian NGOs illegal. So a lot of the projects collapsed, a lot of the programs collapsed, a lot of the institutions where coexistence was promoted crumbled. A lot of the friendships dried up and ended. That it was a jolting realization that normalization efforts are not what the Palestinians want. They don't want to say to the world, yeah, look at these young Jewish and Arab kids, they're playing together on the soccer team, or they're dancing dabka together. They don't want that, and now I begin to understand it. Of course they don't want that. They want to end the occupation. They want to stop having to ask permission from 18-year-old border guards who are immigrants from Russia to get permission to go to a hospital to visit a family member. They don't want to live underneath the pressures of an occupation anymore. And I think that some of the activities that the peace camp was involved with over the years sort of put a Band-Aid over the occupation and said, it'll all be okay. As long as we're friends and we can sing peace songs together. And I think that it's been very grounding for all of us. Now we realize that it's our job to look at the roots of the conflict and not just to decorate the word peace. It's our job to dig at the roots and see what we come up with. Oftentimes Palestinians tell us that our role at this point is our single most valuable contribution for peace at this point is to work within our society, is to work within our own people, speaking our own language, and doing whatever we can to transform the consensus, which is so bleak right now. We're bystanders to horrible crimes against humanity, and it's all being justified because we need security, and we need security desperately. People are blowing themselves up in our streets and in our shuks. We need security. But security doesn't need to vindicate all of the actions, all of the policies of Israel today, which are punishing collectively the entire Palestinian population, because that is not going to break the cycle of violence. And in fact, there's such a feeling of revenge on both sides that our peace actions and our peace circles, they can't possibly do too much. But without them, I think the gap would be even larger. One of the things which is most deeply motivating me is figuring out what it means to be Jewish and to be striving for the Jewish values that I was brought up with. And what I see of the Magen David, of our Star of David, it pains my heart today when you see Israeli flags flying over barbed wire encased compounds which have been taken over by ultra-nationalists. When I see what that symbol means today, when it's seen by Palestinians on tanks, on soldiers' uniforms that are coming to demolish their homes, when it's seen on bulldozers that are coming in to uproot their sustenance, entire groves of
ancient trees, fruit trees, olive trees, when I see how that symbol is being used, when I see a flag, an Israeli flag flying from settlements that are on expropriated Palestinian land, it does something, it shatters something inside me, because I don't feel as though that is the way that this symbol of balance is to be used. This is such a sacred symbol. And I don't feel as though it can be perceived for all of its sacred attributes today. Today is a symbol of occupation. I don't have to look at a Palestinian as my enemy because I'm loyal to that Jewish flag, that Israeli flag. If I'm really loyal to that Israeli flag, I'm going to stand in front of those bulldozers and I'm going to prevent the Jewish drivers of those bulldozers from bulldozing those houses. That is the definition of loyalty. And for me, that is the definition of being Jewish. That is what it means to be Jewish. To stand in the face of injustice and to protest against it